And welcome back, everybody, to another edition of the Auburn Undercover podcast on the 24/7 Sports Network. Christian Clemente here, joined tonight by Jason Caldwell. Jason, we mentioned it on the pregame blitz on Saturday, where it was every time you think you're going to have a quiet weekend in terms of a home game and maybe a little bit of quiet recruiting, it is not the case. And we knew going in that Elijah Melendez was a name to watch, and we're going to touch on him first. But it was a lot higher quality of a visitor list, certainly, than I think we thought it would be. And we're going to touch on some of those names throughout, guys like Usman Kroma, Tyler Atkinson, Bryce Perry-Wright, the 2027 Alabama commit from Viger, a bunch of different guys there. But we have to start with Elijah Melendez. Obviously, visited for the Alabama A&M opener. Shortly before that game even kicked off, he reopened his recruitment, backed off that Miami commitment. Back 2 weeks later, commits to Auburn before the game starts. Perfect timing, to be honest. We were getting ready to go to Tiger Walk, and he does it right then and there. So what does he kind of bring to Auburn's class? Obviously, we talked about it on the pregame blitz. It's an interesting mix of linebackers when you've got a guy like J.J. Falk, a guy like Bryce Diaz, two pretty versatile players, and then Melendez, who is a pretty much straight up middle linebacker all the way.
Yeah, different kinds of guys. You're right. You watch Elijah Melendez and you look at a guy that missed most of his junior year, and you see a guy that still has, he's got so much room for improvement, but he's physical, athletic, pretty good with the ball in his hands, actually. And so you look at him and you think about kind of what it looks like in 2 years. I think he's probably a guy that's 235. Pretty easy. You look at him now, and he's a big guy. You can tell he doesn't mind the weight room. So I think he'll be, 235 or so. Be a true middle linebacker, but a guy that can run. He can make plays on the perimeter. He can chase the ball down, do those things. But he gives you a physical inside linebacker, and I think a guy that, we think about DeMarcus Riddick and kind of where he fits in this future mold. DJ Barber is kind of a true middle linebacker, and it kind of gives you some different options of guys that you're kind of looking for and playing with there. But I like to pick up, and it's a guy you look at him and you go, the guy looks like what it's supposed to look like for a high school linebacker.
Yeah, we knew going into this class, the 2025 class, that linebacker was going to be one of the bigger priorities. Austin Keys, I think, has another year left, but it would be surprising if he used it just because he's been playing college football for so long now. Eugene Asante, I believe, is done with eligibility. Fanaje Gote, same deal. Robert Woodyard, as crazy as it is to say, I think he redshirted and then now has played the last 2 years, so he would only have 2 years left starting next season. So you have a lot of young guys in that room. You mentioned Barber and Riddick, and then now these guys that are coming in, you'll probably have to hit the portal there as well. After the season at linebacker, but they're definitely building up a strong little class there in the 25 cycle. Jason, at running back, Usman Kroma was back on campus, which was pretty huge, to be honest, for a couple of different reasons. One, obviously, he visited for the opener against Alabama A&M, but then week 2, he was in Georgia. And this has gone a bunch of different ways in terms of Auburn battling Florida State, Auburn battling Georgia, all three teams being in it. Now it's kind of Auburn, Georgia a little bit here as we reach the end. And that's the second reason it was so big. He said after his visit that he's locked in a decision date. It will be September 28th. So that is the day of the Auburn-Oklahoma game. Now, he said he's not going to visit anywhere that day. He's going to do a ceremony at home and announce it from home. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. I have a pick in for Auburn. Still feel pretty good about that. Georgia is definitely battling. I think Georgia is off this weekend, if I remember correctly, which is helpful for Auburn. Georgia could obviously still get him in on campus for a visit, but they don't have a game. And I know Auburn is pushing to try and get him back as well. Now, I don't know if that'll happen for the Arkansas game, but getting him on campus for maybe what's the last visit before he makes a decision on the 28th, pretty good deal for Auburn. And we feel like Auburn is, it's still going to be a battle, but we feel like Auburn sits in a good spot for him.
Yeah, and you look at it and having him on campus again, he's a guy that's very comfortable in the surroundings at Auburn. You can see that he's a guy that knows a lot of folks, and he just kind of taking it in. We saw him Saturday, and he just kind of hanging out at Tiger Walk and watching folks talking to Derek Nix for a second before the game. I think he sees a need, obviously, when you start talking about Auburn does not have a kind of a bigger back. He's not, Derrick Henry size, but he is a bigger back. And so we give you a little bit different type of body to go along with Alvin Henderson, but honestly to go along with Damari Alston if he were to return, and Jeremiah Cobb. They're all those guys are kind of similar, and Crum will give you a little bit different type of bag. But yeah, I mean, you got to feel like Auburn's chances are still pretty good considering that you've got him back on campus. And you're right, doesn't look like there would be a spot for him to visit this week unless he were to come back to Auburn, which I wouldn't be shocked to see him back in Auburn on Saturday, to be quite honest. And so if he does, then I think you would probably have to up your chances a little bit more for Auburn as he gets closer to that decision.
Yes, we'll keep tracking that one. The interesting thing there is, look, Georgia would absolutely take him. I don't think they're beating his door down, and I think Auburn is beating his door down to make sure that they get him. So that kind of is why I favor Auburn a little bit more there. Jason, another guy, I feel like I'm a broken record right now. Visited for the first game, visited for New Mexico, Dalen Upshaw, the Miami wide receiver commit. He's a guy that we have obviously known about for a really long time over there at Central Phoenix City. Former teammate of Cam Coleman, friend of Cam Coleman, Dylan Gentry, those guys on Auburn's roster now, obviously. A guy that was offered really early in the process, a guy that was maybe a little bit down the board to start the process and going through the spring and through the summer a little bit, but continued to visit, committed to Miami in July. And now that his senior season is kicked off, things have really only started to ramp up between him and Auburn. We asked him, where does Auburn kind of fit in for you right now? He said, look, Auburn's telling me they want to get me in for an official visit. I'm going to schedule one. Obviously, being just 30 minutes down the road, really there. It's very easy for him to show up for games. Wouldn't be a surprise if he's in for the Arkansas game or the Oklahoma game, or maybe both of those games. He's a guy who's had a really strong senior year, and he's a guy who, Jason, we see it every year. Guys have strong senior years, and they move up the board, or they come out of nowhere or whatever. It looks like Dalen Upshaw is a guy that's moving up the board and could very well be a flip target for Auburn here down the stretch.
Yeah, I think this is one that you look at it and see how Auburn's offense continues to develop, especially with a guy like Hank Brown playing quarterback. That could impact a wide receiver like Dalen Upshaw. It could impact a wide receiver like Caleb Cunningham. It could have an impact on some of those guys. And so I think that's something to watch for. Obviously, having Cam Coleman and Dylan Gentry at Auburn would be a benefit. I think that's a big deal to have those guys here. He's really familiar with the coaching staff, been here so many times. And so I think if you look at it, this is another one of the guys that feels like if Auburn continues to push, then they could make a really strong presence on this one before it's over with.
Yeah, needed to look up his stats there for a second. So when you want to ask what's a strong senior season, well, through the first 4 games over there at Central Phoenix City, 18 catches, 445 yards, 10 touchdowns. So catching a touchdown on not even every other pass as of right now for those Red Devils over there in Central Phoenix City. Jason, I think we're probably going to go and watch them play in a couple weeks against IMG Academy. So that'll be fun to see. Not only him, but a guy like Tristan Lyles, some of those other guys that Central has as well, up against a high school powerhouse there in IMG. So that'll be fun to see. And that'll be a good measure. I would be willing to guess that Auburn will have a staffer or two there for that game, and they'll definitely have their eyes on Dalen Upshaw. Let's jump to the 2026 class, Jason, and talk about some of those guys that were in this weekend as well. Tyler Atkinson, a name that we've talked about plenty on this podcast, and for good reason. In the 24/7 Sports composite there in the 2026 class, he's the #1 linebacker in the country, which is also for good reason. We've seen him in workouts, in practice. We've seen him when they played against Thompson, and he is a freak at linebacker. We think that, it's still extremely early on. He's still hearing out a lot of schools, but it kind of feels like it's whittled its way down to Auburn and Georgia with other schools trying to catch those two at this point, Jason.
Yeah, I mean, I think, obviously this is a guy that I think, we talked about it, but I think the fan base, the support, all those things are really important when you look at some of these young guys because they're seeing it going, hey, look, they're here, they're bought in on the ground floor as this things continue to be built. And we talked about linebacker. I mean, you look at a guy like Tyler Atkinson, and obviously that's a guy that you go, hey, buddy, you come in, you're going to have a chance to play right away. Obviously still a couple of years away, but I think it's a selling point. And having guys from the state of Georgia, having guys from that area, I think that's a big deal. And continuing to recruit those schools is going to be really important moving forward. And so, how much can guys like Kenyatta Watson impact these things moving forward too is going to be something to watch, obviously, with strong ties to that program and the area. It definitely doesn't hurt Auburn to keep that door open, to keep the door of conversation open as well.
Yeah, you mentioned recruiting guys at those schools. His teammate Anthony Davis, the other linebacker, who's also he's a top 247 guy in the 2026 class. He was back for the second weekend in a row. I think we touched on him last week, so going to move on. But kind of those schools sticking in that area a little bit. Bryce Perry Wright up there at Buford. Buford, Grayson, Milton, Langston Hughes, some of those powerhouses there around the Atlanta area. Bryce Perry Wright is definitely one of the top names to know in terms of Auburn's 2026 defensive line class. A guy that Vontrell Kane-Williams has gotten to know really well. Jason, kind of an interesting player. We watched him play against Milton to start the year. Little undersized as a defensive lineman, but he's a playmaker out there. He's an interesting, obviously he still has 2 years of high school football left, but he's an interesting player, and Auburn certainly likes him. And I like his fit as well.
Yeah, I actually got to hang out a little bit with Bryce Perry Wright and Anthony Davis down there toward the end of the game at Auburn. They were on the field kind of hanging out, watching some things, and kind of we were watching a little bit of the Georgia-Kentucky game at the same time on the TV behind us. And so they're having fun. They were enjoying it. Those guys stayed through the rain. We're back out there. They were there in the fourth quarter still watching that game. I think that's a big deal. A lot of those guys were. Could be an easy one where I was going to check out early, head on out of here. But then those guys stayed around. And so I think that's a big deal. But you're right. Bryce Perry Wright, I think, is a physical, athletic guy. Kind of reminds me a little bit of like Antonio Coleman, where you look at him and you go, 6'2". I'm talking about Coach Antonio Coleman, former Auburn player, 6'2", probably end up playing at 255, 260, maybe a little bit more than that. But he's a block of a human being, and he's square-shouldered, physical, powerful, but he's quick and explosive. And so not the long arm kind of guy, but I think a guy that can play on the edge and do some things and potentially maybe be a strong side defensive end. But I think he could give you a little bit of tweener kind of look as well.
Yeah, sticking on the defensive line, actually, wasn't sure if we were going to touch on these guys, but I think we've got some time. The two official visitors that were on campus this weekend, Jordan Crawford and Malik Autry. Jordan Crawford, a man of not many words, but got a chance to catch up with him a little bit. And the big takeaway for him was that he said, LSU had recruited him in the summer, but he kind of shut that down and he's kind of done. And the other quote that was notable from him is that he said, we've got one more coming on offense and defense in terms of other guys in the 25 class. So that was interesting. And then Malik Autry certainly caught the eyes of plenty based on his comments saying that he was looking to try and kind of set up a final decision date for his recruitment. Some people kind of freaked out. What I would say about that is if you're mad about that and you're asking in the next sentence what's going on with Deuce Knight and Neem Offord, you just have to understand that's the way recruiting goes. If you've got guys that are good and that other schools want, that means you've got good ones. And for these kids, it's a once in a lifetime process. For they say it's a 40-year decision. It's not a 4-year decision. And so Malik has been very transparent with Auburn throughout the whole process, taking visits to other schools. Every time he's visited another school, he's probably visited Auburn 3 times to that visit. He's been to Auburn a bunch, and it would be really, really tough for me to see him ending up somewhere else.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. It's guys making sure they make the right decision. That's part of it. But it's kind of neat to see a guy like Jordan Crawford come out of his shell a little bit more. Looking forward to getting a chance to see him Friday night. Should be a monster game. We'll have a chance to see with Carrollton, Georgia coming to Parker and Birmingham. So looking forward to seeing him. And, he is a disruptor. Auburn doesn't have those guys right now on the interior defensive line. That's what Jordan Crawford is. And so look forward to seeing him against a really good team on Friday night to see kind of how he can disrupt that type of game.
Yeah, him and Neem Offord. That'll be fun to watch Neem in that setting. Parker has been running Tim Merritt, who Auburn fans might remember. Auburn was recruiting a little bit at cornerback. I think he's been playing quarterback mostly, and Neem Offord has been playing running back. So it's going to be, it's all hands on deck against Carrollton. So it'll be an interesting and fun game to watch. Carrollton definitely the favorite going in, but at home at Parker, it'll be fun to see. Speaking of Friday nights, Jason, last Friday we were at Auburn High, that is. 3 really stars that we were kind of watching going into that game. Eric Winters obviously committed to Auburn. Zion Grady, who's been a target of Auburn, committed to Ohio State. And then the 2026 running back at Auburn High, Omar Mabson. Great night for all 3 of them. Yeah. They all played fantastic. Omar Mabson, 5 touchdowns. Zion Grady, couple of sacks, some tackles for loss, big disruptor. And then Eric Winters, great night as well, playing all over the place, defense, offense, a crazy kick return for a touchdown that I still don't really know how he got through
Yeah.
all of the traffic to score, but your kind of takeaways from that game and what you saw.
Yeah, start with Omar Mabson because Auburn won the game and won it going away. He was really good. He kind of has a little Emmitt Smith to him in that he is very patient. It doesn't look like he's doing anything, and you look up and he's got 6 yards, he's got 8 yards, and then he's got the burst to get to the edge. And when he does, he's really quick. And so it was fun watching him play, seeing him develop, and he's going to be a guy that's going to be on everybody's list at this time next year. I think he's going to be such a highly recruited guy. Eric Winters, 99-yard kickoff return for a touchdown where he dropped the ball and fumbled it a couple of times, picked up, and had to dodge people inside the 10-yard line. And so once he did, he got to the corner and he showed his speed for a safety. I mean, this is an athletic guy, but he also picked off a 2-point conversion where he diagnosed the play, stepped in front of the little quick out to the flag, and stepped in front of it, interception. In college, it would have been a return for 2 points. In high school, it's bone dead, but really good play from him. And then Zion Grady may have impressed me as much as anybody just because we hadn't seen that out of him in the last couple of years. 2 years ago at Charles Henderson, he weighed about 215, 220, and he was really explosive off the edge. But he's a much bigger guy now. He's probably 255 or so. He was really good. Auburn basically had to go, hey, let's go another direction and stay away from him. And I was really impressed. I think this is a guy, too, that he's at Ohio State. Auburn's still recruiting. I think Auburn will still be in the picture with him to the very end.
Yeah, Jason, looking forward to this weekend. We'll touch on a couple names here to wrap up the show. Interesting kind of schedule opportunity. You would think that you would want to load up for the Oklahoma game in 2 weeks, which Auburn absolutely does, and we'll have a lot of guys in there for that. But that same day, Alabama hosts Georgia. So it is going to be kind of a dogfight to get guys on campus between those two schools with two big-time matchups there. Because of that, Auburn, Arkansas takes a little bit more of a center stage this weekend. Alabama has a bye week. I believe Georgia has a bye week as well. So you definitely have an opportunity to get a bunch of guys on campus. And speaking of Alabama, you're going to get 5-star Alabama wide receiver commit Caleb Cunningham on campus. He messaged me kind of out of the blue on Sunday. I saw a text notification from Caleb Cunningham. I was like, that's weird. I don't know what he would be messaging me about at 8 o'clock on a Sunday night. He said, hey, might be in Auburn this weekend. Well, I said, hey, just let me know when anything becomes official. Turn around about 16 hours later, Monday morning, he says, I'll definitely be in Auburn this weekend. It's a guy that obviously, visited in the summer for his official visit, said that Auburn was number one. A couple weeks later, went to Alabama, ended up with Alabama, but Auburn certainly has not gone away. And he's been a guy, Jason, that we've talked about a lot, who, if Auburn were to flip Deuce Knight from Notre Dame, a lot more attention goes on Caleb Cunningham. So getting him on campus this weekend is certainly a big plus, especially, he's going to visit Alabama for the Georgia game. So this is your last chance for the next 6 weeks, since Auburn won't be home for a while, to get him in for a visit. Yeah, no, it's an important weekend, and you're right. The good thing is for Auburn is that this is a relationship that's been built over months and months, with Derek Nix having recruited him, back when he was in Mississippi. So there's a lot of connections to this Auburn staff. Obviously, Marcus Davis has built strong connections with him, and he's got a chance to know a lot of these guys already. He came over a bunch during the summer and the spring, and so I think this is one to pay attention to. If you're Auburn, it would not hurt to go out and play really well offensively Saturday. That would not hurt at all. And so I think that's something to watch for. Can you get, especially these young wide receivers involved, make some big plays and show, hey, this offense is going to be dynamic. I think that's something to pay attention to. And, a lot of times it doesn't have an impact. I think for a guy like this, it could have an impact to see them go out and be able to light up the scoreboard a little bit. Definitely. And then the other name, look, I mentioned the visitor list will continue to grow. We only know of a handful of names here, but Nelson McGuire, an offensive lineman out of Texas who was offered within the last 2 or 3 weeks or so. He's going to take his official visit this weekend. So that'll be one to watch. That has no correlation, before people freak out, to Andrew Babalola. That recruitment continues to go on. He obviously wanted to have a decision before his senior season started. Just wasn't able to really decide. So now that one is going to stretch on for a while. But Nelson McGuire is an interior guy. He's kind of one of those guys that Auburn offered after Malachi Goodman committed to Penn State. and a guy that they had been warm on for a while and keeping up with. So he'll be on campus this weekend. Not a ton known about him quite yet. This weekend will be a good gauge, Jason, kind of on where things stand. And as Auburn looks to keep adding to its already impressive offensive line class.
And I think you see a pattern developing. Started with DeAndre Carter and then Jacoby Ward. And now you look at a guy like this and 6'4", 335, big body, physical, road grader type of guys. I think you look at seeing what they want to do. They want to be bigger and stronger on the offensive line. I think that's the goal. I think that's what they're looking to do. And this is another one of those guys that could add to that. And so, no question to me that this guy fits exactly what they're looking for. Probably a guard, could potentially be a right tackle, but a guy that with another physical body, strong lower body, guy that can move things. And so I think it's a really good fit for what they're looking for on the offensive line, other than finding those long tackle guys like a Babalola.
Yeah, so Jason, I think unless there's anything I'm missing, we'll probably wrap things up there. There's more names that we could certainly talk about.
Yeah, I think one thing that might be worth at least mentioning is a guy that backed off a decision on Monday night, Floyd Buchard. This is a guy that committed to Oklahoma. He's in school down in South Florida, but last year he was in school in Mobile at Mobile Christian. And Christian, this is a guy that we ran into on the road. Actually created his profile and had the first photo of him in the network. And at that time he was 6'3", 255. And coach was like, Ronnie Cottrell told us, look, hey, this guy's going to be a guy. We talked to Floyd and he's like, yeah, I played soccer and ice hockey and all these different sports. Then last year he played defensive tackle. They won a state championship and he was a big time player for them. Now he's in South Florida. He's probably a 300-pound guy now, but he's really athletic. This is a physical guy. This is a guy that Auburn continues to talk to. And so I think Auburn, I wouldn't be surprised to see him get on a visit list here soon and maybe take a trip. But I think that's a guy to at least put on the back burner a little bit and remember.
Yes, absolutely worth mentioning him, a guy like Joseph Mbachu committed to Florida, Darian Smith, who's up there at St. Francis Academy with Blake Woodby and Bryce Diaz and is committed to Tennessee. All three of those guys are worth mentioning. Look, Auburn is going to load up at O-line and D-line this class. There is no cap on how many guys they will sign at either of those positions.
No, especially when you think about the potential for what scholarships are going to look like, because they still don't know. We know it's going to be 105. We thought it might be 90 or so that would be scholarships, and then you kind of divide up some towards the end and do some partials at the end. It may be 105. You may have 105 full scholarships and full board. I think they're not going to try to limit themselves. And when you add extra bodies, those extra bodies are going to come on the line of scrimmage. You're going to add bigger classes at offensive line and defensive line because of the developmental side, because you need more guys at those spots. And I think you're exactly right. I think we could see maybe bigger classes than people might expect on the lines of scrimmage.
It also goes back to something that Hugh Freeze has talked about a lot and talked about on Monday, that he wants to build through the high school ranks. He would rather get guys out of there than through the portal. And he gushed on guys like Braden Joyner, Malik Blocked, and Cam Coleman, all those young guys, Jamonte Waller.
Yeah,
he gushed on them on Monday.
All those guys. Yeah, I think they're still going to do. But what you want to be able to do, you want to be able to be selective and pick and choose a couple of spots where you really need somebody, instead of having to go say, well, you need 4 or 5 defensive linemen to come in and play. That's what Auburn's had to do the last couple of years because there just weren't any guys there. They had to have that immediate, more veteran presence. Now that you get guys in and you can develop those guys, and all of a sudden when those guys become third-year players, then you're in a position then to where, okay, maybe we need 1 guy instead of 4. Then you can go find one particular guy that you might like and do that. That's what they're looking to build and try to get to here in a couple more years.
Definitely. Glad you brought up Floyd Buchard. That was one that I was going to mention, kind of just forgot about, but that did happen on Monday. So that was definitely worth noting. With that, we will wrap it up there. Appreciate everyone for tuning in, whether it's on YouTube, through the podcast, whatever. I think we've got a pretty good format of the podcast schedule now rolling, where this will be on Tuesdays. Wednesday is the Coach's Corner. Thursdays with Philip. Thursday night, we'll do our live show from AU Club, and that'll be available again on Friday for everyone to listen to. Saturday, obviously, the pregame blitz, the postgame pod. Postgame pod may be on a early Sunday morning, depending on when we're getting out of Jordan-Hare Stadium, like we were at 12:15 on Saturday night. But should have a pretty good schedule for y'all to keep up with here on the podcast kind of network. So appreciate everyone for tuning in, and we will catch you guys again here soon.